want to tell you about my father, F.R. Jackson. He was born in Alabama in 1903. He lived there until he moved to Texas in 1930. And at that time, he worked initially for Humble Oil and Refining Company at the pump station on what is Martin Luther King right now. And it's still operational. He met my mother in a boarding house here in Longview, and they were married in January of 1933. They then moved to Gladewater, and he had a fuel hauling business. I was born while they were in Gladewater in 1936, and then they subsequently moved back to Longview and remained here the remainder of their lives. My father was an independent, self-employed independent oil operator after he moved back to Longview, and worked with many independents throughout Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and New Mexico, primarily in Texas and here in East Texas, discovering several fields in the Wood County area, and as well as in the Cass and Marion counties. He worked in partnership with many local independents. They were active Christians and members of First Baptist Church here in Longview. Their family was a united family. We had a wonderful environment as children, and they sought to teach us the values that they had held to. He was energetic, kind, faithful, trustworthy, dependable, all of the characteristics that many of us would seek to preserve. He passed away in November of 1962. They taught us the value of our heritage, and we seek to preserve it. After they built their dream home in 1953, they determined that the family investment as a sweat equity would be to put in the yard. And so in their planning, they enlisted all of us, and we set a day, and a trailer truck, 18-wheeler full of grass, drove up in front of the house and unloaded. We were shown how to cut the grass in strips 3 inches wide, dig trenches that would hold those strips, and cover the entire backyard from the house to the edge of the lake. Little did we know that it would be a 3-day project, working from sunup to sundown, stopping only for water, food, and rest. It was a sweat equity of the real kind that gave us ownership in that house. And then they worked with us all of the time. We rested, and 3 weeks later, it was time to put in the beds and the flowers and the shrubs. And Mother and Daddy had 2 18-wheelers full of shrubs pulled up, unloaded, and we had to prepare the beds and plant all of the plants. I have long remembered that equity that they gave to us as part of that home and that concept of work. They were sharing each of these days with us.
They were the most wonderful parents that a family could have. They were loving, they were strict, but yet loving more than strict. There was one thing about our family that made me later on is that there was a strong work etiquette between both of them. You had to show up for work, you had to do a day's work, and then you could rest. But until then, you had to do the job. And there was no way to get out of doing the job. You had to keep doing it. And it wasn't that much fun when I was a kid, but it sure was wonderful when I got up and had to go to work every day. They were very trusting, helpful parents that guided you to do the best you could in everything that you did, from school, church, work, and everything. It was it was fun having them as parents as we look back. And I do know some people that can't say that today, but they were very good people.
I'm talking about my mother and father, Frank and Lois Jackson. They both were very creative people, and yet they were practical people too. It's hard to combine practicality and creativity, but they seemed to be able to do it. They were innovative, they were talented, but they, whether it be on a civic project or on a church project or on a home project, they knew how to mix the practical and the creative together. They were masters at collecting and putting the dots together and connecting the sections of the dots together. They did this with their family, they did it with the city, they did it with their church. One of the things that reminds me is they're always doing projects on the city, but they didn't always landscape them. Mother was, when she came into the city offices in '69, felt that they needed to think about the visual as much as they needed to think about the practical side of doing streets. She also felt that if the policemen were going to be defending the city, that they needed to think about the practical things. And so one of the first things she did when she came into the city offices was to insist on giving all of the staff and the policemen and the firemen raises. And I remember how grateful they were for this action. And when she died in '75, the city offices closed. The firemen and the policemen lined the street all the way to the cemetery in tribute for their practical decision. They did this before my father died, and they both felt that you needed to treat people the way that you wanted to be treated yourself. Of course, that's the golden rule, but they felt that it worked in every aspect of their life. And so they treated the janitor or the custodian as the same as they did the vice president of a company. And I think that was their success in dealing with people, because they treated people with a dignity regardless of the status of the person.
If your heart is cold, my fire cannot warm you. This quote was painted over the fireplace in the kitchen of the Jackson home. These words, more than the great size and beauty of the home, more than the dumbwaiter or the elevator, made it a special place because they spoke from the heart of Aunt Lois and Uncle Jack to all who shared this home with them. After my father, Lewis Henderson, was killed in a car wreck in West Texas, Aunt Lois and Uncle Jack insisted that Mother and I move in with them. So from the time I was in the 8th grade in 1953 until my senior year at Baylor University in 1961, we lived here with the Jackson family. Lois landscaped the yard with bright beds of azaleas, daffodils, bride's wreath, and dogwood trees. Mother and Annie made wreaths to decorate the home each Christmas and baked cakes and candies and holiday meals. Every Thanksgiving, there would be a breakfast of quail and dove with biscuits and gravy served after the Thanksgiving service. Most of all, though, I remember the love that we all shared here, whether it was reading the Bible at the breakfast table or discussing national or local concerns. Our hearts were warmed by the kitchen fireplace as we sat around the Lazy Susan table by the fireside with family and friends.